Good evening, how everyone doing? God is good and God is good all the time. My name is Irma J, Spiritual Divine, and also the creator of the world. I just want to say happy Memorial Day. Memorial Day. I'm sorry I'm so late acknowledging the holiday today. But I do have a word for you on tonight. And the topic gonna be restored, back together. All that you done went through, that we done went through, pain and suffering. It always gonna come restored from God. He will restore you right back together. So Echo, God will restore you back together. But sometimes God work like a slow cook. A slow cooker cook real slow. But after the food is finished done, it be so good because it took the process, taking the process of cooking it real good. When something is cooking in a crock pot, real slow. But when it's finished, it be so good because it took it time to process. And that's the same way God operates. And sometimes God take a long time. It's like a cookie crock pot. He working out the details. He working out the process. It's a process he have to he be doing. He be working out a plan for our life. And God process things in His own divine time. And it don't matter how long, but sometimes you may feel like you miss your mark, and you feel like you're just dealing with so much pain and suffering. You're like, what is God? You know, but He working things out. He working a plan out for your life. He be doing all kind of things in the long process. So you may feel like you miss your mark, but wait on God. Everything you lost, everything, all the pain that you suffering, that you went through, He will restore you. Everything, you'll feel like everything is off track. You don't waste so much time. You think you don't miss your mark, but when God step in, He'll put everything right back on track, and He'll have you right back on schedule. That's how He operates. It's a process. What He was doing, just like that crock pot. So first we're gonna talk about the Israelite. Now we know the Israelite called out to God so many times. The first time Israel called out to God is when they was in slavery. They was in slavery for like 430 years, before God had answered them. So that's a long process they was waiting on, but God answered. God answered. God had Moses to take them out of that slavery, and God was putting them in a land with milk and honey, giving them their own land. That's why He told Jacob, "Tell your family to multiply as a nation." Because He was gonna get them. He was gonna have them to be a nation, because He was gonna have them to have their own land. So that's why. So that was a long time cooking in a slow pace. But God helped and restored them to a land with milk and honey. Now, it hurt. When you in your pain and suffering, it hurt. It hurt. But when you in your trials, God will step in. And He might not step in when you want Him to step in, because He's working His own divine time. But He will step in. He is amazing, and He will step in and help, and He will stick by you until your whole process is done. So God makes sure He puts you right back on the map. Everything, everything you lost, He will make sure you get it right back and more. So we still talking about the Israelite. Like I told you, the Israelite cried out so many times. So now Israel had so many enemies because they were favored by God. And a lot of times they had so many enemies because they was favored by God. God had His hand all over the Israelites. And many times you will constantly keep having enemies, because you always, if you got favor on God and God got His hand over your life, there always gonna be problems. So I'm gonna read from Amos, chapter 9, verse 13 through 15. The days are coming, first declare the Lord, who will do these things. Days are coming, declared the Lord, when a reaper will be overtaken by the power, and a planter by one treading grapes. New wine will drip from the mountain and flow from all the hills. Now I will bring back my exalt people Israel, but they will rebuild the ruined city and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine, and they will make garden and eat their fruit. Now I will place Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I had given them, said the Lord your God. Now you see what God said. God said he was going to restore the Israelites. Now he told them, I will uproot you. I will put you in a land that nobody else can move. And that's how he will do. He will bless you. He will put you in somewhere where nobody else can, because he already see how the enemy keep on dipping and dabbing. So God will bless you. He will uproot you, and he will put you somewhere where nobody cannot move you. That's how he operates. That's why sometimes it take a long process because he's working everything out and mapping everything out and putting a plan together. So over here it said the new wine sanctifies the earth riches. Now it is the fruit of a blessed land. Now when Isaac gave Jacob a blessing of birthright, he prayed for abundance of grain and new wine. So when Moses gave his last address as the Israelite prepared to enter into the promised land, he said that God will bless them by giving them grain, new wine, and oil. Now, in this package, by telling the people that new wine will drip from the mountain and flow from all the hill, God promised fruitfulness once again. Now, his trees of doom are followed by words of promise. Now, see, God, he stick with promise. If God tell you He gonna do something, He gonna always stick to His promise. He gonna always stick to His word. When He say a word of what He gonna do, He gonna stick by it. He gonna stick by it until the whole process is done. So where God about to restore to Israel, where no one cannot move them. So we have another prophet, David. He went through hard time and called out to God and said, how long? Sometimes you can be in your trials, and it be severe, so you always gonna be like, how long? How long? And I used to feel like I was the only one complaining. Because you're not supposed to complain in your trials. You're supposed to be happy and you're supposed to go through it with joy, you know. And so I see that David had a problem. He complained a little bit. He whined a little bit. And he was one of God's best prophets too. And I see, I read down the line that Solomon too. He thought life was meaningless, and that was one of God's prophets. So sometimes your trials can be so dramatic, that you just sometimes you're gonna cry out. The pain can be so severe. Some people say you're not supposed to cry till it make you look weak. But I said, no, you don't cry and make you on weak. And sometimes you got to let that pain out sometimes. Especially if you don't have nobody to talk to. You can't keep it in because that's how you will lose your mind and all that kind of stuff. You don't have nobody to talk to and you're just holding in all your trials, your troubles. Sometimes you have to let it out. And sometimes if it means tears, let the tears out. So we're gonna look at Psalms 13:12. Okay, so how long, O Lord, will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and even in every day have sorrow in my heart? Now how long will my enemy trample over me? Now this David crying out to God, saying how long? So how long, O Lord, pierce of the heart of anyone who knows what it feel like to suffer and wrestle with no end in sight? Now we all go through times in life when it seems like God is in hiding. Now we can't imagine what He is up to. We can't imagine what God's up to, and we don't even need to try. And we feel abandoned and forgotten. But this song, limited like many other in the book, assure us that even God, people complain. And that's why I was just saying, it feels desperate in the face of unlimited pain. That's what I'm saying. When you're in pain, sometimes you got to let that pain out. That you cry out this way to God, it's not only perfectly accepted. That's what I told you. We're not supposed to cry. We're not supposed to complain. We're not supposed to be doing none of that stuff. But sometimes your pain be so severe. And see, that's what they did. This is David talking. He know. He said, God is not only perfectly acceptable to him, but such honest is also the first step towards restoring our faith in a maker that who we truly never fail us. Now see, that's the thing. When we complain and we cry, and that's what he's saying is our faith. That's what he's saying. Our faith has to be restored. Because we have to have faith and we have to trust. And sometimes, just like up here, David was like he trusts God, but sometimes the pain can be so severe that he have to let it out. And that's what he said down here is he know it's not acceptable for him to complain and cry. And that's what I be saying to myself too. you know I think about it. We're not supposed to cry. We're not supposed to complain. We're supposed to go through our trials with joy. That's what Peter said back in the book. He said we're supposed to go through our trials and tribulations with joy. But I see a lot of prophets, like me. Sometimes we let it out. Sometimes we cry, especially me. I'm not I'm here by myself. I don't be having nobody to talk to. So if you don't have nobody to talk to, you know, grab your Bible. You know, and sometimes you have to let out. David did a little complaining. He did a lot of crying. You know, and I think Joe is the only one deal with it so peacefully and perfectly. Because Joe he never complained. I think he said something one time, but he stuck by God. He never cursed God. He never got mad with God. His his friends came and couldn't even recognize him. He was taking his pain. He was taking so he wasn't even taking care of himself. He loved the God that much. But we all love God. And we all supposed to go through our trials and tribulation without crying and mumbling and complaining. We're supposed to go through with joy. So that's what David was saying. By he was complaining, by he was crying, that means his faith had to be restored. So that's David crying it out. Uh, but we all know. Remember, David was anointed, but not in position until Saul departed. So David was a ruler, and he was prosperous. So it was a long time coming for David. It was years and years that he was under Saul. And he was anointed way back when he was a young boy. But he didn't get in position to after Saul depart. So it was a long time coming for God to step in for him. He was one of God's favorite too. So that was a long time coming, but God blessed him, and but he also still had enemies that he was fighting along the way. Sometimes you can be blessed. Sometimes God can give you everything, just like the Israelites, but still have enemies. And sometimes you gonna have enemies when you is favored by God, and sometimes God got His hand over your life. The Israelites, no matter how God blessed them, put them in the land, they kept enemies. Because they already know how powerful the Israelite was because God's hand was all over their life. And David, God picked David when he was a young teenager. God picked David. So God had God, he was God's favorite first ever since he was a teenager. So you're gonna always have enemies. David was always running. You know, everybody was always jealous of David, even Saul. Even Saul. Even David was running from his son at one time. So So I'm gonna also read from Psalm 71, 20. Um, though you have made me see trouble, many and bitter, that you will restore my life again. Now from the dead of the earth, you will again bring me up. You will increase my honor and comfort me once again. You know, so that's me. I need healing also because I've been pushing my way through, trying to do everything I can to push my way to the finish line. But at the same time, I never took time to heal. So I'ma also need healing, be restored, everything else. So that come from Psalm 71, 20 and 21. So let's talk about Joseph. We all know Joseph's story. I done preached on Joseph's story so many times in all different kind of ways. So we all know that all that he went through and he waited on God, but God did not show up. But then when God did show up, he raised him up to the top. You remember. So Joseph was in the pit from his brother, throw him in there. So then he was sold to the Ammonites as slavery. So this all the stuff that Joseph had went through. And then he was falsely accused by Parliament White. And he ended up in prison because of that for 2 years. So like he still was praying, he still was asking like, what is God? Because sometimes you could be in a trial for a long time, just like this for like 430 years. That was a long time. you know but God stepped in. So sometimes God get quiet. And now he he was in prison for 2 years. As long as he was in there, God was working out a plan for his life. God in the process. Just like I told you at the beginning, God worked like a slow cooker. He do a process. He do things slowly because he processing everything, putting everything together. He putting your life, putting a plan. While he's sitting in jail, God is working, trying to put his life back together. And he just don't know when he come out, he got so much blessing, so much miracles. He got so much coming for him when he come out. Now God was working a plan for his life. Like I said, God worked at a slow cooker, you know, but at the end it all worked out good for Joseph. And the process all came together. Now because when Joseph came out, he was a ruler over Egypt. Joseph came out with power. And see, that's the slow cooker that God was stuff. He was processing Joe's life when he come out. Joe went through something. He was in the pit. Then he was pulled out as a slave. Then he got accused of a woman. And then he was in prison for 2 years. That's a whole lot of stuff that Joseph went through. You know, and so when he gets out, it's like he didn't know what direction to turn at. He didn't know to walk back home to his family, because he could have got out that pit and broke out and ran home. But he allowed some people to take him because that was part of the process. Part of the process. He had to go along with them, because he was a teenager. He could have broke out and ran, soon as they put him out that pit and ran home. But his daddy assumed that Joseph was dead, you know, and all the while Joseph was about to live a fabulous life. While he was sitting in jail, Joseph thinking about all the stuff that he went through. All the stuff that he went through, just sitting in jail for nothing, falsely accused. And he wondering, well, what is God? Sometimes God will get quiet on you. God is working a process out. He planning a life for Joseph. So when Joseph came out, Joseph was so powerful. He was ruler over all Egypt. He was ruler. He had so much power that his brothers and them had to come to him when they ran out of food. And that's the dream that Joseph tried to tell them, that they're going to have famine in this land. And he tried to tell them, when they do, that you're going to have to come to him for food, for Joseph to save. But they didn't want to hear that. They didn't want to hear that. So every dream that Joseph tried to tell to him, it all came to pass. It all came to pass. So I guess that's why he ain't broke out and ran. Because that was part of his life. He had to go through the process. He couldn't break out and run and go back home because he already had the dream, so he already know what his dream was about. So Joseph came out with power. He done sit in jail for 2 years and then realized God was working a plan out for his life. Because sometimes God can get quiet on you. Sometimes it might take years for God to answer you. But he working things out. He working things out. And you be going through so much pain and so much suffering. And you be like wondering why God is not stepping in. That's just like David. David, he started crying and he started complaining, because the pain started getting severe. It's like all his life he just been running and fighting and running, all his life. He ran up until Saul died, and then he still had to be fighting and dealing with enemies. So he was like, when he gonna get a breakthrough? So now let's talk about Job, and we all know Job's story too. Job's a faithful prophet. He was a faithful person to God. You know, so the devil wanted to test Job. See, the devil already know who is God prophet, who righteous person. The devil already know, and that's the ones the devil gonna always try to test. He even tried to test Jesus when Jesus got baptized and went to fast. The devil gonna talk about, you just been down to bow down to me. I'll give you all this. Jesus said, you get behind me, devil. Because he already know our Heavenly Father own all this. The devil don't own nothing. But we always give the devil so much power. You know, so we're gonna talk about Job. And the devil wanted to test Job. So Job lost everything while he was in his stomach. Now he was waiting for God to step in. He was a mess. He was waiting when God gonna step in. He just lost everything. And he was like, God allowed me to lose everything. But we know Job was through a lot of pain. He went through a whole lot of pain and suffering. And one thing I can say about Job, he ain't complain. And he just said something one time. One time, I think he said what he did. He was trying to figure out what he did to go to. Sometimes we could go to our stone, and we don't know why. They're just like me. I'm confused. I don't know why I'm going through this here. And sometimes you'll question yourself what you did. And sometimes you don't have to do anything. Sometimes, when you're a righteous person, Job haven't done anything. The devil just wanted to test Job and see if Job was going to stray away from God. And see, that's how a lot of people do. When you're faithful to God and you're doing everything that God is telling you to do, you're going to always have someone to try to stray you away from God. So that's what the devil wanted to see. So Job was in so much pain. He was a long time coming. He never give up on God. He never give up on God. He never cursed God. He never got mad with God. He just kept on questioning what he did. That's the only thing he was trying to figure out. So God worked at a slow pace. But when God show up, and I'm telling you, in your life, when God show up, he took a long time, but when God show up, it was all worthwhile. Because at the end of his trials, at the end of his pain and his suffering, this man had lost everything. Everything. He didn't even look like himself no more. His friends couldn't even recognize him. He still was faithful to God. He did not complain. He did not whine. He said something one time that what he did, and God just stood there and allowed him to go through all that pain by himself. Went through everything by himself. He lost everything. But God was watching. God was paying attention. Because see, just like God had told the devil, you could do whatever you want, but you cannot put a hand on him. You cannot take his life. So that's why God was watching and paying attention through his whole trial, to try to make sure that devil don't put a hand on him like he told him not to. So God was planning his life. He was just waiting for it just to be over with. He was just waiting to see. God already know he was faithful because God told that to the devil. Yeah, this is one of my faithful righteous person. That no matter what you do, he will not curse me. And sure enough, Job did not. Job was a faithful man. So after his trials, after the devil and flee away. Cause see when you don't bow down to the devil and you still on God's side, the devil don't have no choice but go ahead and flee away. So when after all that trial was over with, God had restored Job. I mean, restore him with so much power. Give him a wife back. Give him some children back. Give him the animals, the land. Give him everything back. He got more back than what he had before. So all the pain and suffering he had went through, it was worthwhile. You know, and he thought God had left his side. God had not left his side. God was right there. That's just like in my stuff. I'm going through so much pain and suffering. And you be thinking like, what is God? You be thinking that God left your side. But a lot of time God is right there watching and to make sure the devil don't do nothing that he's not supposed to be done. Because see, the devil got to get permission from God to do anything to you. Just like he had the conversation with the devil. He told him, you can do whatever you do, but you cannot take his life. And Joe stood on his ground. Joe stood on his ground. Now, Joe, after all that, Joe got more back than he lost. He got a wife back. He got more children back. More land back. More animals back. Joe already was rich, but the devil had took everything from him. And God made sure Joe got everything back and more than what he lost. So Joe lived 140 years old. That was a blessing. That was amazing. All the stuff that he went through, and that's what I be praying. After, the enemy keep on praying for my funeral, but I be praying that I live a long and prosperous life. And see, when the devil speak negative over their life, you got to speak positive over their life. They want me to fear and fall. I say I should not fear and I should not fall. I should keep on running this race. You know, I should live a long and prosperous life. You know, I should have good health. So what you lost. Even though God work at a slow cooking pace, he always right on time. God would take a long time. But when God show up, if for some reason you still be right on schedule. That's just like me. I was in the pit. It was a long time had wasted. But when God stepped in, they say, "Oh, you still right on schedule," and I'm like, "Really?" I'm like, "Oh, okay." Sometimes you can be in that pace for a long period of time, and you think you're gonna miss your mark. But when God steps in after that long period of time, He'll put you back on track, put you back. You'll be back on schedule again. And you be to think you done lost out, but all the while, God will put you back on track. So he put Joe back on track. Look, Joe lived 140 years with a new wife, more children, more animals, land. It was like he was living his life all over again. Because, see, God will give you a second chapter. God will give you a second chance. No matter what you went through, God will restore you and he will give you a second chapter of your life. I'm heading on to a second chapter of my life. And that's how God will do all your pain and suffering. He will restore you. He will give you a second chapter of a new beginning of your life. And that's what Joe did. He had a new beginning, a new chapter, and he lived 140 years. He was happy. He was prosperous. He was richer than he was before. You know. So first we talked about the Israelite. The Israelite. All the stuff that they went through. God get on their own land. And so the enemy started taking them out their land. And then God moved them out their land because they were being rebellious and moved them to Jerusalem. And so the enemy came messing with them again. Because see, long as there was favor over God. And all their enemies already knew that. They already had enemies. So God came along and had said, I'm about to put y'all in another land and uproot you where no one cannot move you. No one cannot move you. Because see, when you go through so much with your enemies and stuff like that, God will find a place for you where no one cannot move you at all. And that's what he did for the Israelites. Nobody but God was able to move them here and there. Nobody else could not move them. And then we talk about David. David going through his trials, you know, and he was crying and he was complaining. He already knew he was not supposed to complain. He said that. He said he was not supposed to complain. He knew it was not acceptable to God, you know. So he went through so much, you know, and finally when Saul did Paul, he was able to be in charge, you know. So he was prosperous. He was a good prophet and stuff like that, but he was still fighting enemies also, you know, and God was still blessing them at the same time, you know. So and then we talk about Joseph. We talk about all the stuff that Joseph went through. Even his own brother throw him in a pit, you know, and the Ammonites had pulled him out, and he was sold to them for slavery. And then next thing you know, he was under Pharaoh. You know, he was under this man here with his desperate wife and wanted Joseph, but Joseph didn't want her. You know, so time he ended up in jail and he wound up being under Pharaoh. So then when he come out, he was out in there for 2 years, and he probably thought, "Where is God?" And he probably thought God gave him that gift all this long time. He been communicating with God, but then sometimes God will get quiet on you, and you be like, "Where is God? I'm sitting in here for 2 years. You know, where is God?" And you don't realize God work as a